Hey, how's it going?
Hello, everyone.
Pardon me while I grab this mic. You'll hear horrible sounds. I hate them. Hi, we're with the M.A.D.E, the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, down in Oakland, California. And we prepared some fun stuff to talk about in terms of video game preservation, running a museum, and what it's like to be sort of a volunteer for an organization like this. My name's Travis Kindred. I served as a curator for the M.A.D.E for a long time, and as with every other volunteer, have also helped with basically every other facet of museum operations.
Yeah, I'm Criss Bürki. I handle most of the external events for the museum. So that's either if we're exhibiting and we have exhibits or different games that we're showing off, or if we're going to really cool retro gaming conventions and having panels.
Imagine that, where we are. My name's Demian. I was the past creative director and event director, but I've recently moved up to the Portland area, so just kind of got the ball rolling to get the M.A.D.E in the door up here, and we were enjoying it, having a good time. So.
Yeah, and a funny turn of events, I think about 2 years ago, I had just started volunteering for the M.A.D.E and I met John, and I was like, oh, I'm going to Portland for this Portland Retro Gaming Expo, it should be fun. And John was like, oh, Portland, well, I'm actually thinking about moving there. Maybe I should go check out this expo. And then, here you are living in Portland now and like volunteering here, and you're kind of like one of the main reasons why we have a presence here.
Yeah, because
so
they're both staying at my house too, so.
So the M.A.D.E is mostly run by volunteers. We have a few staffers that run our desks, but all of the actual sort of stuff that we're going to talk about is mostly run by volunteers. So there's a bit of a family aspect to it, which is really nice.
Yeah. So to encourage discussion in this panel, we're planning to open it up to questions throughout the panel experience. So if you do have any questions at the end of each slide, please feel free to raise your hand and we can have that conversation. It's definitely meant to be more conversational, so if you do have any questions about how to get involved or some of the stuff that we're working on, feel free to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll constantly be looking for hands. So, don't feel like you don't have a voice.
Yeah.
You totally do.
Cool. All right, so to start, we're just going to talk a little bit about the M.A.D.E itself, just to give you some context as to all the stuff that we do. So the museum itself, the M.A.D.E Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, it is the world's only fully playable nonprofit video game museum. It says we have over 5,300 games here. I believe that has definitely grown in numbers. And we truly span all the decades. We have, I'm pretty sure, all of the gaming systems, except for like the most obscure possible.
Yeah, I don't think we have like a playable Pico. I don't think we have a playable Pippin, but we do have them on display. So
yeah. So we definitely have a mix of ones that we can collect, and of course we try to make sure that every single game is fully available to play to people who come to the museum. So, of course, our biggest mission really is dedicated to preserving video game history and having a lot of educational outreach in our local communities. So we like to involve players of every age in the history of gaming, whether it be participating in some of our weekly educational classes that are free, and they teach programming, or if you're a game developer, you can be a part of our weekly co-working sessions where you can physically attend the M.A.D.E and develop games together. So we have a lot of different things that are going on a pretty consistent basis.
Yep.
Great. Recently, we just celebrated our 9th year. The M.A.D.E was formed in 2010, and back at the end of September, I think it was the 27th is the date, officially?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, so that is when we turned 9, so we're going to have a 10th something coming up next year if you want to visit. We host weekly tournaments as well. It's mostly your Smash fans, 64 and Melee and all that. So we definitely keep local communities there in terms of the players as well. We provide tours to local youth organizations, schools, and other districts. So we do a lot of stuff with local educational facilities as well. We host developer talks and other industry networking events as well. So anytime that GDC comes around, you'll have a lot of developers who will be at the M.A.D.E and being able to share their stories or exchange business cards and all that fancy stuff.
Being the event director in the past there, groups that come in from all over the Bay Area, Google, Twitch, birthday parties. So it's just a nice social place to be where people can kind of loosen up and have a good time.
Yeah, exactly. And if I had to describe the museum, I know there's a little picture on the screen, but I wrote this down. If I had to describe the museum, imagine your 5 best friends' gaming basements all stuck together, and you could play every single game that you ever wanted to play. That's the museum. So yeah, that's basically the vibe.
Yeah, there's a pretty strong reason why we're all kind of into it.
Yeah, because we were all those people with those gaming basements.
Yeah.
So, cool. All right, so let's talk about video game archiving.
Yeah, okay. So video game archiving is obviously extremely important. There are different aspects to what you have to do in order for an organization that's completely run by volunteers to manage all of this. The first sort of challenge you have is inventory. So what we had to do is we had to create an inventory system from scratch. There are inventory programs that you can get that are made for museums and libraries. They're often very expensive, and we're a nonprofit, again, totally run by volunteers. So it's very hard to get, a $600 or $700, if not $6,000 or $7,000 license for an inventory software that has support and is, going to still work in 3 years. So all of that had to be made from scratch, which was no small feat. And so it took a lot of time, a lot of hours of work, and it takes a lot of work to maintain. We're constantly getting more stuff. We're constantly having to make sure that the stuff that we have is still there. And so it really takes a village. We tried to, like a lot of people tried to kickstart that process multiple times, and it really took some serious dedication to lock something in, see it all the way through. Like we have 5 or 6 different inventory systems that are about 20% done, and we have one that is needs 20% more work, right? So it's just sort of an interesting problem to have to solve.
Right. Yeah, definitely. We've been lucky enough to have someone come into a more leadership position who can help us maintain the momentum of inventorying everything, because donations don't necessarily stop. They're always coming in, and we want to make sure that we know what we have and we know what we need to preserve, of course. So, every weekend you'll see folks who are working on the weekend shifts who are also able to help out by inventorying, applying all of the decals that we need to the hardware, making sure that everything is correctly placed in our back room, which was a nightmare 6 months ago. So it's a lot better now. It's an organized nightmare. So we're doing well.
Yeah, it went from just complete carnage and mayhem to just carnage and mayhem, but with shelves that could move.
Multiple
So
shelves.
it's a nice transition.
People always like to donate what they're just not using anymore. We take a lot of donations in from general public. There's a couple, maybe 100 combat cartridges around. So we're trying to figure out what to do with that. We've done some flea market kind of garage sales, selling off excess as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess that ties us into acquisitions a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So,
Okay, yeah.
acquisitions. Obviously, folks are very willing to donate, which is extremely great. We always want to encourage donations, no matter what the trifles will be on the back end of that. It does mean that you get tax write-offs, which is pretty nice. So if you ever consider it, you get something for it too, which is nice. But it does mean that we get a ton of donations, a ton. So they're really helpful. A lot of volume comes through, and then we really have to ask ourselves these questions: how do we manage the incoming donations, and how do we assess the quality? So really, what's it going to look like? Is it really worth keeping? Is it worth looking into? Is it maybe not necessarily as valuable, or maybe we have 1 billion copies of whatever just came in already. So how do we manage that, and how do we deal with that? And honestly, the real answer here is that it's very tough. And we're still working through it as a museum. As Travis mentioned, we're all volunteers and we're all giving our own time to this, on top of the full-time jobs, on top of the other hobbies. So I'm not going to say it's an easy road, but it's a road that we're going down. And it can definitely become a backlog, especially around PCs and retro computer hardware in particular, since there's just so much of it. So it's the hardest to parse through and takes a while, and not a whole lot of it might be archivable at the end of the day. So sometimes we do need to make the call of, if we're going to choose to keep something, why? And if we're not going to choose to keep something, what do we do? What do we do with it?
Yeah, it's a little interesting. So like, in particular, we mentioned PCs. So like, in the mid-90s, suddenly the home computer hit everyone's house. Which was really awesome. Everyone suddenly had access to computer games and the internet and playing solitaire instead of working. But the issue was that 2 years later, all those machines were obsolete. And then 2 years after that, all the machines that everyone replaced were now obsolete. And you ended up in this cycle of obsolescence, which is an affect of, as we all know, of the industry. But so you have people who have tons and tons and tons of these machines, and they don't want to throw them away. They maybe played Command and Conquer, and they want to donate it. And that's great, but it's a little hard for us to be like, okay, cool, I have a 20-year-old, 512 megabyte hard drive, and I need to find a machine that I can run this on so I can extract all the files, and then decide whether or not this hard drive is still worth using, and then find an application for it. Like that amount of work is quite phenomenal and quite monstrous. And for some, it's really fun. I mean, I like restoring hardware. That's also a lot of work, but I like it. But we get a lot, there's just a ton. So we don't always accept every single PC that comes in. But yeah, anything that was popular and also had that cycle of obsolescence is the kind of stuff we get a lot of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And CRT TVs, so people like to dump them on us.
Yeah, so John sort of mentioned this, but how do you manage the overflow of all the things that come in? We've recently actually tried to start selling some of our stuff, some of our backlog. So of course we want to make sure that we're assessing the hardware or software, whatever it may be, to make sure that of course we already have a copy of it so that we are archiving it properly. On its original intention as much as possible. And then after that, if we have a ton of extras, it's a really great way to get extra income into the museum since we are a nonprofit. So it really goes straight back into just working on the facilities and everything too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of hardware specific knowledge you need to have too. Like we had a testing party once where we were trying to test every NES, SNES, everything all the way up to the PS3. And we kept ending up with all these Nintendos that didn't work. It doesn't work. And it turned out the person that we had assigned to take care of that didn't know how a NES worked. Didn't understand how the cartridge slot worked or what sort of science to work for. And if you know anything about a NES, they used River City Ransom, which is a notorious cart for failure. It almost always has a failure state when you try to turn it on. And so of course, every NES was considered to be broken. And so you have to do internal education as well. You have to make sure that, I just never foresaw that as being a problem because I know how every NES is broken. Every problem I see, I know how to fix. So I just assume everyone else does. But that's just not the case. Not everybody grew up with the same video game sort of experience.
Nerddom, yeah.
Yes.
So how can you get involved? The two best ways in terms of archiving, one is of course keep donating, please. As I said, even with all of the processes that we are sort of giving you insight into, it is so well worth it to donate because we'll always be able to archive what's most important and you get a sweet tax write-off, so don't forget that. And secondly, of course, if you do have some spare cycles of time, museums like us are really looking for volunteers with time. You don't have to be an expert or super knowledgeable in your area just to help provide some of your time and at least move the progress bar a little bit closer to the goal.
Yeah, as with any nonprofit, the most valuable asset is not talent, it's time. The education of what to do is something that the nonprofit is usually willing to do to help you out. But that time that you're giving back is absolutely essential and valuable for that nonprofit to actually work.
Yeah.
All of us got involved just from the passion that we have for playing video games and discovering a place where we could share that feeling was probably one of the most important aspects of all of us to stay there and keep volunteering and have a good time and find a role to play.
Yeah, cool. So does anyone have any questions before we move on about archiving? Cool.
Rad.
Sweet. On to history.
Awesome. I'll leave this one up because this is kind of my jam. So exhibits. Exhibits are awesome. They give you a really great chance as a designer, as an exhibit designer, to tell a story that maybe not everyone is familiar with regarding video game history, or to try and find something new, find some connection between games and titles that didn't exist before. I love it. I love exhibits. Exhibits really come down to three primary aspects. There's the technical side, which is like, hey, what cables do I need for which console and how many controllers and what type of controller, right? Like, not everybody's gonna know how to hook up Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles with 4 GBAs into a GameCube. A lot of people don't know what a GBA is, so that can be an issue. So you have to make sure you're very well aware that anyone who's running your exhibit knows every single cable that they need, and they have a name for that thing. And then there's the sort of logistics of running an exhibit. Like, you need to have signage. You need to make sure that every aspect of your exhibit is clearly defined and has a purpose, and that someone who walks up, like what you don't want is the experience where someone walks up and doesn't know what your exhibit's about, and they're confused. What you want to make sure is, as soon as they walk up, they know exactly what's going on. And they're like, oh, I get it. The barrier of information from the step I took before to the step I took now has disappeared, and now I understand what this exhibit's about. And then the creative part, which is telling that story and crafting that story, which is super fun. But yeah, so like exhibits are a really important and really fun aspect of the museum.
Yeah, totally. So executing a featured exhibit, so for the creative part, that seems to be typically the easiest and also best starting point to create an exhibit. And then of course you get into the logistics and the technical limitations. For the logistics, of course, you want to get the word out both internally and externally. So internally with clear signage around the exhibit, making sure that, you don't necessarily need someone to handhold you through it in order to fully understand the point and the intention of it. Of course, making sure that your staff is well aware of the exhibit and able to speak knowledgeably to it. And then externally, managing a social presence, making sure that you're available and online on social media for people to at least understand that there's something new and exciting that they should return to the museum for. Yeah. So, do you want to do some living history stuff, John? We're here.
Pull this in front of me a little bit. Most of the systems that we have play off the original cartridges in the museum, but we do use some emulator cartridges to keep it easier to use. It limits space as far as what we're trying to keep around. So using the EverDrives and the multi-carts are just really easy to go forward with that. It also makes rare playable games accessible. We don't have everything that's out there. We'd like it. It's just not something that we have a holy grail that can be played and passed out and on the floor. So because we don't want it to walk out the door as well too. So those really help. Peripherals, trying to keep things secure. We have displays that are in glass cases with rarer items, and having those so they're visible at least. Just not for everyone to have to play with, but it keeps a generational kind of thing in there so people can see what was important with the systems itself. Some things we keep locked up, some things need to stay locked up as well too. So you've got to keep the important stuff undercover, under lock and key at times too.
Yeah, I think that really goes into this whole concept of preservation and protection of history and of what is important about like our mission statement. Is that a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What's the most valuable thing in your collection?
Ooh.
That's a great
Most
question.
valuable
We
thing
actually
in that
we were
question.
just
We
sort
were
of
just talking about the
Walked in.
Ataris, right? Or the Atari carts?
Yeah. So I think that it's hard to say what the most valuable thing is. There is definitely one of the most important things, and it was one of the reasons that we started the museum, was the artistic director at a flea market bought a stock of just Atari EEPROM chips that were just in a lot. And when he checked them out, they turned out to be unreleased and unfinished prototypes for a slew of Atari games that had never been released. And he realized what he had and wanted to, he had already had a collection of sort of rare items, and he wanted to preserve this. He realized he wanted to make sure people had access to this. And so, like, that's one of the, like, there's one of a kind, it can't ever be, like, there aren't more of them. And there are also some other things. We have a fully signed box copy of an Atari 2600 with a lot of the development crew on there. We have a Fairchild Channel F. It's in box. That's really nice.
Odyssey systems with the overlays for the TV.
Yeah, the overlays are pretty valuable. There's quite a bit. Most of the really valuable stuff is definitely on the older side, in the 70s and early 80s. I'm trying to think if we have some of the more valuable stuff that's recent. I think we do, but I can't remember offhand. One thing that's really important is to go back to that preservation and protection, is that for a lot of those really rare items, as an interactive play museum, we want to make sure that people have access to them, but we want to make sure we control what the kind of access they have. And so the EverDrives really allow us to give people the experience of playing a very rare or hard to find game, at least on the original hardware. They're putting an EverDrive card into a Genesis. It's not through a USB third-party controller. They're using a real Genesis controller. And that's part of the experience. Like, the game designers didn't create the games to be played with a totally different controller. And so with that being said, we don't have a light gun attached to every single console. We don't have a racing wheel attached to every single console. But those exhibits really give us a chance to highlight those aspects of game design and game experiences from the past, where we can plug, we can have a light gun exhibit, we can have a racing wheel exhibit, we can have a peripheral exhibit to give people that opportunity.
Yeah, cool. So to wrap this one up, how do you get involved? The best part about exhibits is that you don't have to be local to actually form an idea for an exhibit. One of the best things you can do is actually contribute creatively to the process. So since they can be more remote, it's one of the easiest ways to get involved in a museum like ours. If you have a passion for a theme, maybe a couple of games that you always thought sort of worked together somehow, we've done some really cool exhibits before. We did a co-op multiplayer exhibit, which we still bring around to some of our events. So we did an all-female designer or sound designer exhibit?
It was like a women in games exhibit.
Yeah. So it went through like a ton of like really cool games that were like very, very much spearheaded by women.
Silent Hill, we did Silent Hill, a nice exhibit on that.
Yeah, we did a sound exhibit with some of those like more horror games as well. So yeah, again, all it takes is an idea. There's tons of opportunities to get involved specifically in this way, and we're always looking for ideas like that. So any questions on this one before we move on? All right, cool.
Rad.
Cool. All right, preservation and restoration, one of the most important things that we do. So John, actually, do you want to talk about the Neo-Habitat project?
Okay, you're talking to it. All right. Neo-Habitat was actually a project that was the first MMO game, mass multiplayer online game. And it was a Lucasfilms game, which is now LucasArts, of course, originally for the Commodore 64. And that exhibit was put together over a number of years and kind of finalized over, I think, the last year and a half, where it was playable. So actually, Neo-Habitat is playable. You can go online and play it on your mobile devices as well, too, these days. So it's a nice little find out there as preservation. You have your hand raised.
Was it the best game out?
It was one of the first games at the time that more than one person could play it, and they played it by going online through a modem, if you can imagine that. And if you know what a modem is, all right?
Yeah, this was when the internet didn't have websites.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, super old.
So, but it was an early game that kind of started what everybody enjoys today. So a lot of people are online, we're all playing together in different ways with different platforms and applications, but we're connecting in that way.
Yeah, so if you actually go to neohabitat.org right now, you can play this game with anybody else on the internet, thanks to the M.A.D.E. being able to work with Randy Farmer in particular. who helped us. He was one of the co-creators of the game, and he helped us bring that actually back up online.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with Habitat, it has a sort of visual aesthetic very similar to Maniac Mansion. So you have your like little character that can kind of scroll left and right and back and forward. It's really interesting to see how they figured out how to make an MMO in an age where like that was not an acronym anyone knew, where like acronyms really referred to chipsets, not playstyles. It's super fascinating. I highly recommend it. At the very least, like watch some YouTube videos about it, or check out the information on our website, because it is a really interesting look into something that really was like ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Heavy pixelation going on with that too.
It's on Pro 64.
Yeah. So that was a pretty like prime example, I'd say, of keeping the museum actively with their efforts to maintain preservation of games and gaming history. And then for restoration, so sort of the age-old question of how do we decide what to restore, what to preserve, and what to abandon ultimately. And there's a lot to talk about there.
The quick and dirty, as I'm sure we're talking to like the absolute best crowd here about this. When you're talking about old electronics, they weren't always engineered and designed to last forever. And most things, like we're all familiar with capacitors exploding, with batteries leaking, with contacts corroding. These are common problems that are really, really, really hard to prevent, and can cause a lot of issues when you're trying to restore. And when it comes to what should or shouldn't we restore, what should or shouldn't we try to spend time and effort on, the question really comes down to what do the volunteers have the ability to do? Because this is honestly like the most technically like specific task, right? It's really hard to teach someone how to deal with capacitor corrosion when they don't know what a PCB is, when they've never seen that before. It's also a great opportunity for education. It's like, if you've never cleaned the, or never replaced a cartridge loader on an American NES, then that's a great way to start. Like, it's an easy fix, it's super fun, and you take something that didn't work and you make it work. And that's a really wonderful feeling. But a much bigger issue that we have is disk rot. So like, if you're not familiar, disk rot is CDs, DVDs, all compact disc media over time corrodes and just sort of rots away, and those games are gone. That physical media is non-archivable. And so there are other museums that are doing a really great job of trying to digitize every disc they possibly can. That's not something that we can necessarily do or can handle. So our goal is to make sure that we have the largest stock possible of these discs, and to make sure that we're doing our best to preserve them and to make sure that they have as long and healthy a loving life as they can before disc rot eventually sort of takes over.
Right, yeah. So how can you get involved in the preservation and restoration game, the metagame, if you will? So definitely out of all the, I guess if you call them roles that we would have volunteering at museums like ours, this would be the most specific. It does require a specific skill set. It will be labor intensive. You are physically working with hardware to sort of tinker and try and fix things up. But if this is something that you're passionate about, maybe you have a background in it, or it's just something that you do because you're at a retro gaming convention and you're probably in that realm anyway, this is a really, really great step, and also incredibly valuable to museums like ours. We could always use more help with the tinkerers of the world.
Yeah, and if you're anything like me, like you're going through the expo, and while you're looking for like the really cool rare stuff you want to find, you're also looking in all the $2 bins for anything that looks like it's worth restoring. It's kind of like walking into a room where that's all there is. It's just a room full of stuff that needs like help. And so, like getting to take stuff back and take it to your soldering iron, take it to your multi-tester, and just really dig in. It's so much fun. I could talk at length about that kind of stuff.
The good stuff's always on top of the tables, but look underneath and you'll probably find something decent to take home too. So.
Worth restoring, yes. Any questions about preservation or restoration?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna see you guys on Wednesday.
Heck yeah.
So I'm curious, how many people do you guys have doing, restoration and stuff? Because that is like something that I'm good at and what I do, and so I sort of feel guilty that I've been a little too lazy to show up.
Where have you been for the last 9 years?
We don't have a very large staff of people who do restoration work. I've done a little bit, but I've been volunteering for a couple of years, and I've probably repaired like one game here, and just it's a time commitment. We have had a few people recently who have done a lot of work with restoring Commodore 64s, restoring sort of that era of tech, some Ataris and stuff. But the best way to get more involved in that way is actually let us know that you're coming, because we have plenty of stuff for you to do. Not everyone on staff will know exactly what needs to be done or how to do it, but by reaching out beforehand, we'll be like, all right, sweet, we know what's coming, like, we got you.
And we can get you in touch with the right people too, who can definitely like set you up with all the hardware you need as well.
And bring friends who have like interests. So.
Yeah, bring friends.
The reason I bring that up is because if you had enough people, you might be able to like
Streamline it, yeah.
Yeah. Lewis Rossman, right? Like you could do something like that, but also promote the museum at the same time.
It's a process. It's finding the right tools and then having the right people at the right time to fulfill the needs that we have at that time. So.
Yeah.
But this is a great example. Like what you just said is actually a really, really good idea. And there's no reason why we're not doing that. The only reason we're not doing that is because we haven't heard your good idea yet. Like that's how everything at the M.A.D.E started, right?
Yep.
It wasn't like, here's the design for this museum for the next 10 years. Here's our 5-year plan, our 10-year plan, our 15-year plan. It was more like the 5-minute plan. It's like, well, we have lunch at noon, so like, what are we gonna get done in the next hour? Yeah. It's stuff like this where you're like, I have this really good idea because I've seen this or I'm inspired by this. And all of us here, like, I'm sure we're all just like, oh yeah, I would love to watch like the M.A.D.E stream restoration and rebuilding of the tech that we have, if only just to see like, well, what are they gonna work on next? How are they gonna deal with that problem? It's that easy to get involved.
Yeah, cool. We await seeing you on Wednesday. All right, innovations in the industry. So this is just a little bit about how the museum not only, of course, is here to preserve, archive, restore, all that great stuff, but we are also trying to continue a path forward and in the present of games. So one of the first things that is still fully operational at the museum is called the BSBB, the Big Steel Battalion Box. So this dude here is in the box. So the BSBB is an immersion cockpit for the mech simulation game Steel Battalion on the original Xbox, which released in 2002. The entire thing is a 360 experience. The door closes behind you, and then you are in the pilot seat of this game. There is also a 2-player use of it. There's a cooperative metagame for the communication of 2 players. The second person is actually on the left where you see that stack of TV screens. They would be off to the left with an instruction operation manual, and they try to help you through the simulation of being the pilot in this game.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really fun. When your mech is like going down, all these red lights like start flashing. There are lights on the outside of the box.
It's really scary, actually.
There's a
rumble seat aspect
Yeah.
as well too.
Yeah, there's a UV camera on you, and so people outside can watch a little TV of you playing the game. It's super fun, and the operator can also take control. There's a switch to switch to a separate controller on the outside. So someone can get you started and let you go, or take over in case you have to bail.
There's a coaching aspect to that, so you're not
it's
just
pretty cool.
thrown in there and not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's awesome.
You can kind of see in this photo right in front of the screen, there's a controller there. It's not like a controller that you pick up with your hands and play. Some of you may be familiar with this controller. It is literally a single-use controller made exclusively to play this game, and it's like a cockpit like control center basically. And so we have 2 of those, one for the person outside the box, and one, of course, for the pilot inside the box. And so when Travis is saying the outer person can take control, they're taking control by also using this like crazy control center sort of controller.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with the Steel Battalion controller, which is probably like, if you've ever watched any clickbaity top 10 like video game controllers, it's definitely
It's gotta
in
be in
there.
there, yeah.
3 panels, 2 joysticks. I think it has over 50 buttons. I could be wrong. 3 pedals. Every single button. There's a button for the windshield wipers. like literally, it's like, oh, there's mud on my windshield. I better use the windshield wiper button. Like, it is the most over-designed thing ever.
And this was put together by somebody who did this for a Maker's Fair, and he actually won a Blue Ribbon Award for that in the Bay Area. His name is Dave Schuff, and he's our resident volunteer to come in and help with our video games as well too for the coin ops that we have.
Yeah, and he still like tunes it up and goes in every weekend and tweaks it and makes a little extra thing,
Yeah.
puts some more like decorations on it. It's a really like fully immersive thing
Yeah.
that he spent years working on.
Yeah, Chef is also like a huge arcade enthusiast, so he got us a Virtua On recently, like a full Virtua On, which is really fun.
Yeah. So indie games. Let's talk a little bit about that. John, do you wanna give it a shot?
You go ahead with that.
All right, so indie games. Basically, this is sort of to represent the present in the past, present, and future of the M.A.D.E. This is where we have our local co-working that happens weekly, I think twice weekly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you're an aspiring game developer or even a seasoned one who wants to collaborate with new people, we offer that space on Tuesdays and Thursdays for people to come and physically, meet each other at the M.A.D.E. and start developing something together.
And I'll add something to that. One of our coworkers is actually showing a game in the Pig Squad tables down there in the Retrocade, and his name is Mark Wilson, and he put together a game called Card Slinger. So go down after the talk and check out his game.
Something that was developed at the museum. So we also host, in terms of indie games, we host other local meetups for different indie games to be able to showcase theirs as well. Even if they're not directly created at the M.A.D.E., of course, we're still fostering that culture. So there was something called the Friendship Garden that recently hosted an event at the M.A.D.E. to get a bunch of indie games together. We've also done narrative game meetups at the museum to do like text-based narrative game development and, add to that community as well.
Yep.
So how do we get involved, Travis?
Okay, yeah, so if you want to get involved, this is actually pretty great. If you are, obviously if you're a developer in the Bay Area and you're an indie developer, you need space, this is a great opportunity. There's also, like these developers are like, you can talk to them. You can talk to them remotely and get advice or give them advice or play their games is actually the big one. These games are mostly playable. Like you can reach out, figure out how to get a copy and play it. That's as someone who makes games for a living, like that is the biggest thing.
It's very valuable,
is getting people
yeah.
to play your game.
The testing is huge. It is so critical.
Yeah, and it's really cool to realize that you're playing a game that was made by people who like actually wanted to preserve and restore games as a culture. So that's really fun. But yeah.
By the way, to get involved up here in Portland, I know there is a large community built around that. So if you can't come to the Oakland M.A.D.E., then
Yeah.
find a place here and get some help with your game or try to help somebody with theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the support of one is the support of many, especially when it comes to preservation and the museums that are working on similar missions as we are. So, of course, we would love it if you made games at the M.A.D.E., but we'd also totally love it if you just made games with your fellow community members wherever you may be.
Yeah, the problem we're running into is not that there are too many games.
Cool. Any questions about this slide? All right. We're going to get to our final slide. So this is education and outreach. Someone want to talk about Scratch?
Yeah, so if you're familiar, Scratch is sort of a basic programming language that's very easy to use and very easy to teach. So we use Scratch for weekly classes for children. So children make games at the M.A.D.E. through Scratch. It's really awesome. We offer them for free, and it's just really cool to see all these kids hop into this room, open up all these laptops, and just start like plugging away, arguing about like how high that character should jump or like how good that control feels. Like that's a really wonderful thing. They are taught by engineers, programmers, designers that volunteer at the M.A.D.E. And teach these classes for free. It's again, a really wonderful experience. It's mostly geared towards kids, but as adults, you can also take these classes and you can reach out to us and get more of that kind of, those educational opportunities.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so outreach events, this is basically what I do, so I will talk about this. At the end of the day, you know, we want to make sure that we're developing a mutually beneficial relationship with shows and local expos and just our community in general when it comes to spreading our awareness of the museum's initiatives and hopefully finding some middle ground there. So we are a nonprofit, and I know we've said that a bunch, but you know, that means that we're working with a limited budget. That budget is zero. So we really need to figure out, you know, creative and constructive ways that we can involve ourselves and, you know, help be a participant of the conversation and further spread awareness of the museum's initiatives, but also do something that will benefit the show or the expo or the community. So this past 2019, we were at GDC, the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. We were the only museum representation in the Retro Play booth, which is the first time that they ever did this at this show. Usually the Retro Play booth has about 3 to 4 different museum or other nonprofit groups to join that area. And for the first time this year, they decided to do something different and feature one specific museum, and it was us. And you know, really having the ability to honor that relationship that they have created with us was really great. We had the ability to really spread our awareness and, you know, talk a lot about the museum's initiatives, especially being so local to the Bay Area. And it worked out that, of course, GDC now knows our name and has our contact, so in the future, when other opportunities come around, they're able to help us out as well in terms of, you know, providing this to us when we don't have monetary funds to help out. M.A.D.E. West is another show that we've been doing for the past 3 years. We just did the 3rd one back in September. It's a huge community building show, and it's actually really great because it brings around interests of other volunteers or potential volunteers to get involved from that audience. So, you know, there's a lot of Venn diagrams that overlap of interests, and we get some really great volunteers from shows like this, kind of like this guy.
Yeah, I'm a musician and I write academic papers about video game music, and so I went to M.A.D.E. West to give a panel. I found the M.A.D.E. booth there and met Criss, who was working the booth, and I was like, oh, this sounds awesome. And she said, well, if you want to get involved, just, you know, come into one of our volunteer meetings. And sure enough, like, 3 years later, here I am.
Yeah, exactly.
Roped in pretty quick, as I
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hooked. So we also try to get involved at local events, you know, going to different just local things in the Bay Area to cultivate that local community as well. We have pretty good involvement at things like First Fridays, which is just like a monthly event that happens at a museum, a space and science museum in Oakland, which is just really cool. There's developer talks that we host in-house. We've done pop-ups at local shops, both in the San Francisco city and in Oakland, the city. We've done community expos around different events and also holidays. And yeah, just lots of different things that we try to consistently maintain a presence in. And panels like this really help us further that conversation and even spread out further, you know, being in Portland now and a little ways away, you know, it's about a day-long drive to get down to where we are now. But it really helps us get the word out, at least, you know, on the West Coast and hopefully beyond. So yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about how to get involved in the M.A.D.E. specifically, how to get involved in this museum in Oakland, which I think we all understand is not totally viable for everyone here. I hope that what the message really is these are the questions that a museum has to ask itself. These are the questions that an organization like this has to ask in order to run. And so it's not so much like this is the Oakland Museum is the only one you can volunteer for, come here and do this with us. It's like, this is what it takes for this to happen, and it can happen anywhere. It can happen here. You could start your own museum. It wasn't any kind of like grand design. It was just an idea, and these are the kinds of experiences that have come out from that one idea.
Yep.
We have some other volunteers from the museum who've been out in the audience today. So volunteers are important. Leadership's important. Finding a path to go on. But you know, the people out there helping with the show, thank them. They're here and contributing and hoping to give you a good time. So make sure to pay it forward and say thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we end up closing our panel, do we have any questions about museums or anything we've talked about or any other ideas that you guys have had before we kind of wrap up our closing thoughts?
Oh, is there a disclaimer you guys recommend for like PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 2 games or anything like that?
as you hold up your cartridge, your cases. I don't specifically have a disclaimer that I would particularly recommend offhand. I don't restore discs. What I would normally do in this case is actually just go into sort of a bunch of community forums. But I think one thing that's really great, so like what I would do is probably actually hit up my museum Slack and start asking everyone there because that's my resource. Luckily you're here, you can actually ask a ton of people and connect with them about the best possible ways to restore and maintain your discs, unless someone here has a really great answer to that question.
Careful with liquids.
Yeah, definitely.
Disc rot, 5,000%.
Yep.
And not everything has to be tech-oriented. One of our volunteers who started with the museum, he was supposed to come up to the show. He does a lot of pixel art. So there's a lot of pixel art that we have for sale up in the windows at the museum. And everybody contributes in different ways. So any way that you can find to help out or see what the needs are, maybe you could fill it, you know?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. He makes a ton of pixel art, just in his spare time because he loves to do it as his own personal creative hobby. And it actually brings in I wouldn't say substantial, but a non-zero, very valuable amount of income for the museum on a pretty consistent basis.
We have a gift shop. There's tokens available, stickers. I've got a shirt I'm modeling today. So.
Yeah, as it turns out, a lot of people like video games.
Wow, did you guys know?
I had no idea. And so it's really, like I will say my favorite, aside from designing exhibits, which is just I love doing, my favorite part of working at this museum is that, last night, a bunch of us who volunteer at the M.A.D.E. went out for drinks, and it was fantastic, and all we did was talk about video games, because that's all we like to talk about. And it's just great to, just feel super comfortable in the fact that, I could bring up a super obscure Japanese-only release of Bomberman for the Super Famicom, and there's at least one person who's like, oh yeah, that game's so good.
Yeah, it's a great community. It definitely made me feel like I had a community to work with and work towards when I first moved to the Bay Area. That was my biggest reason to be involved, and it has just been such a invaluable experience really for me. So I hope that if you do choose to get involved, please know that you will find some really great value personally for this as well. And really, we just hope to see you out there.
Oh, sorry, there's one more.
I think you mentioned that you keep multiple copies of discs, so if you end up with a bunch of, just potential copies, how do you actually separate those out, manage them? Do you keep certain copies separate from others to keep them cleaner?
Well, for more valuable titles, absolutely. For things that are really, really common, or if we have just a huge overflow, we'll use either just plastic spindle holders. We'll use the sort of cloth and plastic sheath
Binders.
Binder pages. If we can, we put them in their cases, but that's usually not an option. We have boxes for almost every single game in the library on the floor, but they're all empty.
One of the last slides showed all those cases on the displays up there by the TVs. So.
And so we try to make sure that we handle them. That we're not just like, oh, you want to play this game? Here you go. So they are handled with a slightly bit greater care than average. We should and could do more, but that just turns into time and a lot of effort. Yeah, and also that is also one of those technical things, right? Someone has to know what to look out for. Not everybody knows it. Just stacking them up loosely is actually not that great. Or just putting them into just for printer paper sleeves is actually not that great either. So there's a little bit of a technical know-how that goes into it.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. So thank you for coming in and listening up. If you have any other questions, feel free to chat.
Yeah, the M.A.D.E.org, just real quick, is the best place to get in touch with us. info@themade.org will literally hit all of our inboxes. So if you have any questions or you're interested in volunteering or just interested in knowing what you can do to contribute to your own local community around this, please get in touch and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, see you on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Aw.